And away we go. It's the DFS Early Bird presented by Awesemo.com. Dan Strafford and Adam Scherer along with you on this Wednesday morning, getting ready for a 7-game National Basketball Association slate on DraftKings FanDuel Fantasy Draft. Maybe some Thrive in your life, I don't know, but plenty of DFS to talk about. Adam, how the hell are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Looking forward to doing a podcast with you for, I think, the first time in a while.
It's been a minute, but here we are. We get to break down and probably be a new schedule for a couple of weeks. Dave Lochran decides that he actually exercises once a week. He goes and plays hockey, and I know Tuesdays are a little bit choppy for him, so he's decided to switch with Adam. So EMAC and Lawfield will be with you Thursday mornings. Adam and I are with you Wednesday mornings for the foreseeable future. We'll let you know of any future updates as we move forward, and everybody knows you listen for me anyway, so you'll be with us Wednesday morning. So let's dive in. We have James Harden here at point guard, Luka Doncic, and using DraftKings prices, very open and honest about that. Steph Curry, Drew Holiday, Kemba Walker at 8,800. Donovan Mitchell, Devin Booker is questionable. He is listed already as a game-time decision. Deangelo Russell is 8K and above. We'll get to sort of that mid-tier 8K and below next. You know, Doncic's usage has gone through the roof over the past, let's say, 10 games. I know he's up from about 27.5 to 28 on the year to about 32.5, I think, over the past 10. You have Harden with his crazy run of 30-plus point games. And then Steph Curry against the San Antonio Spurs team that's apparently sitting DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge at 9,100. Of the rest or of those top three, is there a point guard you like best out of this mix, or do you feel like this is a position that may offer us a bit of salary relief and stay away from the top end?
I mean, I think the top end's loaded. I think it's going to be really difficult to really choose one over the rest. I expect it to be a spot where I'm kind of mixing and matching these guys because, Luka without the guys that left. Without Dennis Smith, you get the ball in his hands more. You see his assist percentage for the season jump up to about 36%. Granted, I haven't seen it confirmed, but I assume that Hardaway and the Knicks guys will be playing for Dallas. But either way, I mean, it's Luka's show. Like, even after Dennis Smith Jr. came back from his injury, Luka was basically just playing entirely differently than he was at the beginning of the season when Dennis Smith Jr. was on the floor. So it's his team now, and he, I think, is going to be a triple-double threat every single time he takes the floor. You have a nice matchup against Charlotte, a team that has really been struggling defensively. They play at a very slow pace, which isn't great, but everything's there for Luka to have a great game. The price tags come up a little bit, but that's not something that I think that we should be too concerned about, because when he was 8,300 on DraftKings, I think I said actually on that podcast that it was one of the most egregious price tags we've had all season long. So it's not a spot where, he jumped $1,200. Now he's, correctly or overpriced. I really don't think he is. The guy is just an absolute superstar, and he's still less than 10K. Curry at 9,100. I mean, the upside is clearly there. San Antonio has really been struggling defensively lately. Now they're missing 3 of their starters, and it wouldn't even be shocking if Rudy Gay sat too. I mean, what's the reason that Gay would play when DeRozan and Aldridge aren't here? So it's basically Golden State against the San Antonio backups. And while that means there is blowout risk, the blowout has to come from somewhere, and it can clearly be Curry. So I really like the top end of this position.
Yeah, lots to like here, and lots of different ways to go, really. So you're going to have probably some interesting ownership here at the top end. Doncic has been amazing to watch, and I would assume Atlanta fans are not overly happy with that deal with Trae Young. Hell, Young can score, but it just seems like Doncic is going to be a force in this league for a long time. And put Porzingis next to him, that's going to be a fun one for many years to come. What about this mid-tier, let's say Walker and on down? He has a matchup on the other side against Dallas. You get Deangelo Russell at 81 against Denver. Chris Paul has clearly taken sort of a side seat to James Harden. He's been fine, scoring DK points right in the mid-30s, high 30s for his price point. But we haven't seen a real breakout from Paul. Do you see one here potentially against Sacramento? Or is the ball-dominant nature of Harden right now too much for Paul to overcome?
I mean, it definitely hurts him, obviously, that Harden's out there, but he still gets close to half of his minutes, or I guess not half, close to like a third of his minutes without Harden on the floor, which is where he really can rack up stats with that second unit. And the price tag is still cheap enough that in this matchup against Sacramento, assuming he gets in that like 30 to 32-minute range, I still think the floor is really high. And then if he's efficient or he runs good in terms of like rebounding or assists or something, he can still, really beat that price tag. So I do still have interest in him, not quite as much as I had at 6,600 against the Suns last game, but still a pretty decent spot. Russell at 8,100 against a Denver defense that's been struggling a bit is perfectly fine. Obviously no Dinwiddie, and without him on the floor, you're looking at about a 33% usage rate, close to a 40% assist percentage. He's been very, very good. So no issues there. And then Kemba against Dallas, coming off of a phenomenal game last night against the Clippers. I'll be interested to see what the Hornets starting lineup looks like, because Cody Zeller does have a very positive impact on Kemba. Kemba's always one of the highest pick and roll frequency guys in the NBA, and Cody Zeller is a very good screener. And so it's not really surprising that for the season, Kemba's averaged nearly 1.3 points per minute with Cody Zeller on the floor. He's averaged about 1.12 without him. The assist percentage drops from like 30% to 24%. His effective field goal percentage drops like 9 percentage points. So the more minutes Cody Zeller plays, the better it is for Kemba. And whenever he does rejoin the starting lineup, it's going to be a spot where I want to be jumping on Kemba before everyone else does.
That makes a ton of sense. I remember, was it you that talked about specifically about the pick and roll data with Kemba and Plumlee? I don't know who brought it up a couple of weeks back when he was out, but specifically.
Yeah. I saw that I had seen an article that just mentioned Zeller being a really good screener, and then it just kind of clicked for me that probably was why Kemba sucked for the last month.
Yeah, I think you might have mentioned it on the deeper dive or something along there. I remember specifically hearing about it. But what about the mid-tier? And I guess we have to talk about San Antonio Spurs guards, whether or not it's Bryn Forbes or Patty Mills at 4,300 and 4,200. But are there any 6K, Rubio or Beasley in his matchup, Malcolm Brogdon against the Washington Wizards? Any of those guys seem to at least be intriguing, or do you make your way down to the much cheaper end of some of these Spurs guards and a Fred Jackson or a Tim Frazier?
I actually think the mid-range is really strong here. Chris Dunn is expected to play at 6,400 in a nice matchup against the Pels. So I like him there. Bledsoe against Washington. The only thing that you really have to worry about for him and Brogdon is that Milwaukee can just absolutely destroy Washington here, in Milwaukee. I would expect that to be the case, but at the same time, you don't want to predict that to happen. And they're both cheap enough where, Bledsoe over the last month has averaged about 1.2 fantasy points per minute. He's in a nice spot against a Washington team that, while they have improved defensively over since John Wall's injury, really, they have not improved in terms of rim protection and defending within 6 feet of the basket. Bledsoe's not a great shooter, but he can get to the rim. He can score at the basket. And I think that it's still an appealing matchup for him for that reason. Ricky Rubio, should play 30-plus minutes against Phoenix. That's about as good a spot as you can get. Again, you have legitimate blowout concerns there with Phoenix going into Utah. But one thing we have seen from Quinn Snyder over the last couple of years for Utah is that if it's like a 30-point game after 3 quarters, you won't really see the starters anymore. But at home, he definitely gives them a pretty long leash, even in non-competitive games. I assume just to reward the fans for being there or whatever. But you'll see a lot of times in, like 22-point games that are clearly out of hand, you'll still see the starters only lose a couple of minutes. So that's something to keep in mind with Rubio. And then you have Satoransky at 5,600. Again, plenty of blowout concerns in that game, but he's playing 34 to 36 minutes in competitive games. He's averaging about 0.9 fantasy points per minute this season. It is a pace-up spot for him. He just torched this Milwaukee team last time he faced them, and he triple-doubled against them the time before that. So if you want to look into, team versus player matchups, then, there's good results there, and the price tag's just too cheap, I think.
What about the San Antonio Spurs here? Do you go to Forbes or Mills simply because the minutes are going to be there even in a blowout, or is this just one to stay away from for you?
No, I mean, They're too cheap. There's a pretty good chance that at least one of them has a good game. Obviously, you get plenty of usage for them without DeRozan or Aldridge on the floor, and then the increased minutes as well. So, it's still Bryn Forbes, it's still Patty Mills. You're not super excited about rostering them, but it's not like the price tag came up to account for the fact that 3/5 of the starting lineup are not playing.
That makes total sense. Anybody else worth mentioning here before we touch on shooting guard next?
Nothing I see that's too exciting. The New Orleans guards are still cheap. They're in a good matchup against Chicago. Your guess is as good as mine how that rotation goes on a night-to-night basis, and on top of that, how they produce on a night-to-night basis. So it's one of those spots where, like, Frank Jackson was 25% the other day,
Right.
and it was a real easy fade just because of the volatility. Now, if everyone's going to go to the Spurs guys, you can go back to Frank Jackson and hope that he gets 36 minutes. It's just that you shouldn't feel confident in that happening. You have to understand that you're just making a play against the field, and assuming he's going to be lower owned than the obvious Spurs value makes it somewhat appealing.
I'm happy to be able to do this live on our podcast. Obviously, it's recorded. People will watch this later. The Lakers are, according to Shams Charania, making a trade for Reggie Bullock from the Detroit Pistons. The Lakers are trading. They're trading guards via. I can't even pronounce it. Sviatoslava Mikola and a draft pick to Detroit for Reggie Bullock.
I was going to ask if they were trading that entire starting unit that just lost by 45 to the Pacers.
Just ship them. Just get them out here. Yeah. Amazing. But so maybe it's a precursor. Maybe the Pelicans really like Bullock, and they're gonna make that work.
Keep that Lonzo guy. Just get us Reggie Bullock.
Get me Reggie Bullock, damn it. All right, let's continue to shooting guard next. Where obviously we have a lot of the same players at point guard when we use MPE over on DraftKings. Harden 12-6, Curry again 9-1, Holiday and Mitchell all the same. Brad Beal is 8,600 against Milwaukee. DeRozan is out. You have Zach LaVine at 6,600. You mentioned Dunn at 6,400. And then you get Klay Thompson all the way down there at 6,200. Lots of the same guys that we had at point guard. Anybody stand out specifically as shooting guard or guys we haven't spoken about yet?
Harden at the top, obviously. Not as appealing when Chris Paul plays, but you still have to keep in mind that he's playing about 50% of his minutes without Chris Paul. If Paul plays 30 minutes, Harden's out there for all 18 that Paul's not playing. And so it's, close to 50% of his minutes. And it basically averages out to like a 43% usage rate for Harden, near 40% assist percentage. And obviously he's just, playing out of his mind right now. So you can kind of skew those numbers even a little bit higher, because I think that currently he's just taking more shots than normal, even with Chris Paul on the floor. It's a perfectly fine matchup against Sacramento. So I still like Harden. It really just comes down to how much value you get and what his ownership looks like. He's obviously coming off of another big game the other night against Phoenix. He had like 70-something fantasy points. If people are going to force him into their lineups and there's not really good value, like if people are going to just like play a lot of Bryn Forbes and Patty Mills just so they can pay for James Harden over, a Steph Curry or someone that is like that and has that kind of ceiling for less, then you don't need to match the field. But if the field is going to save the money and not go up to Harden, then again, you can just get the highest scoring player on the slate at low ownership.
Right, and don't forget, Adam talks a good deal about ownership, and if you're MMEing, or even if you're not, if you're building, 3 max or 20 max lineups, you want to be at least cognizant of ownership, talking about the Pelicans guards versus the Spurs guards, or even whether or not people are on Frazier over Jackson or Forbes over Mills might be intriguing. Osmo.com does have ownership projections available to you, the subscriber, not to you who watch for free over there on YouTube. If you want to get in on that, get in on Josh's projections, Alex's grades, and lineup builder, and the article itself that Adam and Lofty write each and every day, Monday through Saturday. You need to sign up. Use the promo code EARLYBIRD, 50% off your first month. Anybody else here at shooting guard you want to point out that we haven't talked about as of yet? You have a place of Ingles and Lamb down at 56 and 5,400. Napier, Kenrich Williams is coming off a 35, 30, 38-minute outings where he's seen, decent fantasy point per minute was it about points? Was that 0.88, 0.9 or so DK points per minute for his outings with the Pels. Anybody you want to mention here before we move to small forward?
Bradley Beal, you had kind of mentioned before. It's not a great matchup against a very good Milwaukee team, but the price tag's low enough for him where he at least has tournament upside. Getting a little bit cheaper, I like Middleton, I like Oubre, and it's worth pointing out that Marco Belinelli is possibly the biggest beneficiary with DeRozan and Aldridge out because, Bryn Forbes can only do so much to score. Patty Mills can only do so much to score. Belinelli is really, I think, the best scorer out of that group. So you could see him at 4K, probably. I guess he could be inserted into the starting lineup, but whether he starts or comes off the bench, I think that he has as much upside as any of those guys.
It is always interesting. I'm a big fan of Belinelli off the bench just because of usage and the like. You don't want to run to somebody just because they're inserted into the starting lineup. You want to take into consideration where the usage is going to be and where the pieces come together. But there's no one else to score. Much to Adam's point here, Belinelli, when DeRozan and Aldridge are off the court, looking at NBA Wowie, and this is for just this season thus far, is second. Let's see. No, that's all right. Third in the team in usage, but legitimately second because Lonnie Walker has 9 minutes. So 24.4 usage percentage, according to NBA Wowie, field goal percentage of 40%. Belinelli makes a ton of sense, and he's sort of my kryptonite. I play way more Marco Belinelli than I should each and every slate that he's available. So he will be in my lineups. I can almost guarantee that this far in advance, which is always a good sign for my lineup construction. But let's talk next about small forward, where we have Giannis. And being Lofty's not here, I can say Giannis Antetokounmpo without really worrying about him correcting how I said it. I'm sure I'll get a DM from him at some point on Wednesday that I said it wrong. But 11.4 for Giannis.
You got my last name right, so you can say Giannis is whatever you want.
There it is. You have Giannis here. You have Doncic again. And this probably enters into the conversation. I know it's early. You haven't constructed a lineup. Not expecting you to really break it down. But does Luka make more sense at small forward on this slate than he probably does at point guard, simply because of not as many good options here at small forward as we do at point guard?
Yeah, I think so. Giannis obviously is a great option against Washington, but as much as I hate talking about blowouts again, and it's kind of like if I'm paying 11.4 for Giannis, I really would like to turn it into at least some sort of a mini game stack, because you have to run pretty well for, you basically have to get 70 from Giannis in 3 quarters if no one on Washington's going off with him. So then you can look to the price discount and, you get Luka there, who's basically the same price as Kevin Durant. And while it seems, kind of counterintuitive to prefer Luka to Kevin Durant has, since Steve Kerr started playing Durant and Curry alongside each other for more minutes, Durant's averaged like 1.25 fantasy points per minute. Even if you take that away for the season, he's averaged, 1.3, 1.35. Luka averages like 1.45 fantasy points per minute without Dennis Smith Jr. on the floor. He's actually been a more productive player than Kevin Durant this season under the conditions that they're both playing under. So while from a name value standpoint, it just seems weird seeing Luka being $200 more than Durant, I think he's the more valuable player between the two. And so it basically leaves him, by himself in that price range is the best play. And then if you look to the mid-range, you have like Otto Porter, who's who has plenty of upside, but there's a ton of risk there. Like, right, he can fail really easily. Buddy Hield is a good play, but a little overpriced probably. It's just there's not a lot of good small forward options. And so whereas there were a lot of good point guard options. So I do think Luka's more attractive here.
All right, what other names pop out to you on the first scroll through here as potential plays or guys that you think at least deserve a second look for those starting to at least look forward to Wednesday's 7-game slate?
So I mean, Rudy Gay obviously could play 22 minutes in a blowout, but he's played 101 minutes without Aldridge, White, or DeRozan on the floor this season. He's averaged 1.6 DraftKings points per minute. He has a 32.5% usage rate, 23% assist percentage, 17.5% rebounding percentage. He has to be the number one option on this offense for as long as he's out there. It's obviously risky from a game flow standpoint, but there's a ton of upside if the Spurs somehow hang in this game. So I think that he's perfectly fine. Kelly Oubre's played well, but he has a tough matchup. Same goes for Josh Jackson. It's a pretty ugly mid range for the most part.
Yeah, not too surprising there. Wondering as we go through and see that Devin Booker is potentially out. He's a game time decision. Does that put you on someone like Josh Jackson here for Phoenix, or is this price point a little bit too high for a volatile player like Jackson at 5,500?
No, if Booker's out, I love Oubre and I love Jackson. For one, they're both playing a bunch of minutes anyway, but it would help to solidify those minutes even more. But for two, I mean, you'd be talking about playing without Devin Booker and without TJ Warren. Josh Jackson gets a pretty big usage bump under those conditions. He's played 480 minutes this season. He's averaged a little less than a fantasy point per minute because he's insanely inefficient, a 42.9% effective field goal percentage. But a 29% usage rate and a 20% assist percentage means that the opportunity is at least there for him to have a big game, even if it's going to come and go on a game-to-game basis. So if Booker's out, I would really like both of those guys a lot. I think that if Booker's in, then they're still fine. It's just not as appealing.
All right. Anybody cheap here or ready to move on to power forward?
No, it's just a pretty ugly position.
Remind everyone, Belinelli, small forward eligible here on DK. So again, if you're trying to sort of game the system with MPE, don't get locked into specific players at specific positions. Make sure you're moving them around and understanding that you can get different roster constructions together with the MPE. Don't be afraid to do that. And always somebody that I find intriguing because he always seems to play between 25 and 28 minutes is Andre Iguodala, even in blowouts. So not sure how many minutes he'll get here, but if that game stays close, he's just 3,900 on DK and somebody who seems to always be putting together 25 to 30 DraftKings points outings. I know there have been downsides of late, but always somebody that I find intriguing, at least to have in my player pool as I'm doing further research and trying to do some roster construction. At power forward, we have a questionable Anthony Davis. Now, obvious questions around whether or not Davis will even be with New Orleans. It's seeming that he will be. He sat out Monday with the finger injury, but that is rumored to have been a management decision. He was healthy and ready to play, but now listed as questionable last I saw with the finger. So now it's saying, okay, Shams Charania is saying expected to remain inactive. All right.
Yeah.
So there you have it. So you'll have no AD again, which opens up all of the questions around whether or not a Julius Randle will be able to play with his ankle. If he is, makes for an interesting play here against Chicago at 7,700. Aldridge is out. Giannis is here, and then Durant is here as well. Mirotic already listed as out. Lauri Markkanen on the other side of that Chicago-New Orleans matchup. Kenneth Faried has his price point at $7K, which seems more than reasonable, which wasn't something I was expecting to say in the beginning of the season, but here we are. Faried playing a ton of minutes for Houston and getting a ton of rebounds and hustle stats for them. What do you got at power forward? Who are some of the names at the top end that at least you were considering this early on?
Yeah, so I mean, Markkanen at 6,900 I think is in a good spot against New Orleans. It's obviously a shell of what the Pelicans were a couple of weeks ago. Their entire team at this point is just sitting out, pretending to be injured until they get traded. And so it's, a good spot for Markkanen, who's playing 34 to 36 minutes a night. Very productive player. So I like him quite a bit. Kenneth Faried, I don't get nearly as much as I would like. And I need to figure out why, because I love Kenneth Faried as a player. He's always been a plus one fantasy point per minute guy. And now he's getting, 34 minutes a night. He's in a favorable matchup against the Kings and, should play around 34 minutes against a pretty big Sacramento team. So I like him quite a bit. Obviously, he is more valuable when you can roster him at power forward as opposed to center. Beyond that, it gets pretty thin pretty quick. Like you have DeMarcus Cousins, you have Draymond Green, both reasonable plays at 6,800 and 6,300 respectively, but also both guys who probably give you a score that you're like happy with or can live with, but also unlikely to really like help you win anything. So it's tough there. I do really, really like Marvin Bagley. We're seeing the minutes for him come up. He had the best game of his career so far against whoever he played on the fourth. That game's not showing up.
Bagley?
Yeah.
What's against San Antonio?
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so best game that he's had in his career against San Antonio
And
the other night.
just to point out, and I have to point it out before I let that go. The reason I know that so specifically is because on the pod on Monday, I talked about Aldridge and was talked about him at length of playing against the New Orleans front court. And they weren't playing New Orleans; they were playing Sacramento. So it stuck with me since then that I just got the game wrong. But anyway, continue on about Marvin Bagley the third.
Yeah, so I mean, his minutes are trending up. That's been the thing all season long. Is that at the beginning of the year, Dave Yeager just refused to play him basically at all. Now we're seeing Bjelica not play many minutes, and you're seeing Bagley get a lot. We saw him play some time at center even against San Antonio, which was nice to see. He's a very productive player when he gets the minutes, and he's clearly getting the minutes now. Gets a favorable matchup against a Houston team who is not very good defensively and has been one of the worst rebounding teams in the league since Clint Capella's injury. So at a $5,800 price tag, I expect Bagley will be very popular coming off of I believe it was 54-point DraftKings performance against San Antonio, but he should be popular, and I am perfectly fine going right back to it.
What about a cheap option here? Is there room for someone like a Maxi Kleber or a Rashawn Holmes or Dwight Powell, guys who are sub 5K with some potential double-double upside, or do you see this as a position, at least at first blush, at first glance here, you think you're going to pay up a little bit for?
There are a few cheap value options. For one, Davis Bertans is
Sure.
not very good, but he's 4,100. He's going to play as many minutes as he can handle. He's another Spurs guy that you're not going to feel good putting him in your lineup, but someone has to do reasonably well for a game. So he's fine. You have Maxi Kleber, as you said, at 4,300, who I think probably plays 28 to 30 minutes in a pretty favorable spot against the Charlotte front court. He's fine. And then Jeff Green in tournaments, he's coming off of a monster game against I'm really going to blank on these guys. Against Atlanta last game, he had like 42 DraftKings points. But against Milwaukee, it's a really favorable matchup for Green because Milwaukee's center rotation is Brook Lopez, who, while he has the size of a center, he isn't really a center. He just goes and hangs out at the 3-point line and then boxes guys out and lets someone else grab a rebound. And then behind him, you have Ersan, who is not a real center, and you have Giannis or DJ Wilson playing the 5. So it's a game where we saw it the last time Washington played Milwaukee, and I think it'll be the case again where there's no use for Jan Mahinmi in the center rotation, which means more center minutes for Jeff Green, which means more productive minutes playing closer to the basket and also just playing more minutes in general. He's now coming off the bench, which gives him a boost in usage rate, not playing every single minute alongside Bradley Beal or the other starters. So I think that while he's risky, there is a lot of upside for him at only $5,000.
Makes some sense to me. Let's close it out with some center talk. And hard for me to get away from Jokic here right away at 10-6 against Brooklyn. Not breaking any news there or deep analysis, but any center against the Nets, and especially of this skill set that Jokic has, I will be in on. Any concerns with his minutes over the past 10 games that he's been fluctuating between 23 all the way up to 37 and could be wildly somewhere in between? Do you see Mike Malone giving him enough run here for a high upside game at 10-6?
No, not really. I mean, I'll project him for 34 minutes, and that's fine. Like he can play, he can go off in 32. He could get a couple more. I'm not sure. I haven't looked if they play on Thursday. Yeah, Thursday. Doing the podcast on a different day throws me off. But yeah, so I'm not sure if he plays on Thursday. If they do have back-to-back
play on Thursday.
Okay. Yeah, then he should be fine. We've seen Malone at times this year, cut a couple minutes off on back-to-backs for Jokic, but not concerned about that here, obviously. And he's just been so insanely good. I mean, he leads the team in usage, rebounding, and assist percentages. He has a 40% assist percentage over the last month. He is basically a point guard that plays really close to the basket and is like 7 feet tall. So, in a really good spot against Brooklyn. Brooklyn actually over the last month also has been the fastest paced team in the NBA, which certainly doesn't hurt. They've been the second most efficient defense, which is shocking, but also really doesn't matter that much for someone like Jokic who can contribute in so many different ways. So, 10-6 for Jokic, I think is a really, really fair price tag. The only issue is that the opportunity cost of the position, as usual, is just really, really, through the roof.
Yep, it makes total sense. You have lots of options. You have Gobert against Phoenix. Jahlil Okafor continues to perform here. He's up to 7,300. But if Randall continues to be out, which is a question mark right now, he could be in line for another big game with a matchup with Chicago. You do have Fareed eligible here. Then you get into the likes of DeAndre Ayton. Willie Cauley-Stein at 5,500. Bagley, you mentioned before, is at 5,800. And then again, some of the cheaper options. Who else do you like here at center?
Yeah, pretty much all of them. Gobert against Phoenix, I love. I mean, he's just been phenomenal this season. The price tag, for whatever reason, at least on DraftKings, doesn't really move. He's just always in that mid 8K range. So I like him a lot. DeAndre Ayton has a difficult matchup against Gobert in Utah, but he's $6,500 on DraftKings, playing around 32 or 33 minutes a night. That's really nice. He's played when he's played alongside Booker without TJ Warren this season, he's averaged 1.1 DraftKings points per minute. You'll see a little bit more usage if Booker sits. So either way, I like Ayton. You have Fareed, who we already talked about, in a good spot. You have Okafor, who I think it's a homecoming game too for anyone that cares about narratives. But regardless, it's a friendly matchup against Chicago. If Randall's out, you have Okafor averaging well over a fantasy point per minute. You have Willie Cauley-Stein. I mean, we said we like Bagley, but you have Willie Cauley-Stein against one of the worst rebounding teams in the NBA right now at just $5,500, playing somewhere around 30 minutes. It's just an insanely deep position.
All right, let's close it out. Any value options here at center that you think are worth mentioning? Sub 5K or no one that cheap at the position?
So just a quick note, because obviously he's coming off of a monster game. Bobby Portis is a lot riskier today than he was last game. Jabari Parker is expected to play, not on the injury report. So you're now back to Jim Boylan, just whether or not he decides to play Robin Lopez over Bobby Portis for God knows what reason. So just keep that in mind. Don't go like game log watching on Portis. $5,100 Jared Allen is certainly appealing against Denver. It's just too cheap of a price tag. I mean, the minutes are inconsistent for him, but the upside is definitely there, and the price tag is at a point where it factors in that we don't really know how many minutes he's going to play. And then you get, if you're really digging for value, Pau Gasol at 3,200, Jakob Poeltl at 3,200. These guys have to split 48 minutes at center basically. I don't know if it'll be down the middle. I would assume that it is, but they're both really cheap. They're both productive on a per minute basis. It's just that there's no need for them to play a lot of minutes most of the time on this team. So either one of them I think are perfectly fine value options.
All right, one last question before we go. Do like to ask when I host above 10K, we have Harden, we have Giannis, and we have Jokic. And you know what, I'll do above 9K because it just gives us more to play with. And I think I know your answer. But Drew Holiday, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Doncic, Jokic, Antetokounmpo, and Harden. You have to choose one to build your lineup around. Who are you starting with on this slate?
Luka.
Yeah, that's what I figured. That's why I opened it up. If you had to go 10K or above, Jokic, Giannis, or Harden, which one are you choosing?
I think that one's really tough because so I would take Jokic over Luka if there weren't positions.
Yep.
But the reason I give Luka the edge over Jokic is because of the center position. And so when you talk about Harden, Jokic, and Giannis, the price tag on Jokic compared to them is just clearly the best. But you're giving up this, a center spot. So I think it's really tough. I would say that I either want to get the money for Harden or go to Jokic. I think it's a phenomenal spot for Giannis, but it's just so tough to see how that game stays close without like you needing a game stack to win.
All right. Don't forget, ownership percentages are up over there on Osmo.com for subscribers. Use the promo code EARLYBIRD, which you see here on the screen. I am on. Adam's name appears on screen, which is nice as well. The other day, Emac just posted a overlay with your images blacked out. So, I mean, there's that too. But nonetheless, love you, Emac. I know you're listening. I know you're still listening. I love you, buddy. If you haven't, hit like on this video, as always, over on YouTube. Subscribe, share it on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter. Get the word out there. If you're listening on iTunes, don't forget to subscribe, share it as well. Leave a comment, leave a rating, and any of the other podcasting apps do exactly the same. And legitimately, share it out. Tag Osmo_com. Tag myself at Dan Stravin, of course, at Ship My Money DFS for Adam Scher over there on Twitter. And of course, it's I'm a Boss on FanDuel if you're looking for head-to-heads. It's still one of my favorite things in the world. No, with that said, we'll be back with you tomorrow morning. It is EMAC. It is Lofty, LOUGHY_D on the DFS Early Bird, presented by Awesemo.com.